Hello, I am Kyle Russell, and I always say that. It sounds so funny when I say just my name, Kyle Russell. There was a little kid I used to know, and he used to combine first and last names. He'd say Kyle Russell, and I always feel like I'm doing that when I introduce myself, especially on these webinars. These webinars are special types of experiences because it's me giving you a monologue for about an hour about a given topic. And this time, I'm going to do something called a crystal Q&A. And I can tell that this is going to be the first of several because I constantly get a steady stream of questions from people, and I want to be able to answer them in a way that has more lasting value, that is something that you can refer to again later. In general, my webinars, and I've got at least a half dozen now, going up and up and up, because I tend to do them once a month. But each one of these webinars is an educational opportunity for me to share with you what it is that I know about crystals and to help you sort of build up your knowledge base. And my other webinars are usually on specific topics, but this one we're going to cover more different ground because we are working with a stream of questions that have come to me online, or that is to say by email, which is my favorite way for people to reach out. crystalconcentrics@gmail. That's the best way to reach me. I also have two prominent Facebook pages. One is Power Stone Crystals, and the other is Crystal Concentric, singular. So it's www.facebook.com/crystalconcentric. And you might ask yourself, who is this guy? Why should I be listening to him? I mean, obviously, if you've worked with me before, or you've met me, or you see the types of selections that I bring to expos or have online, you know that I work with a lot of crystals. I have a lot of crystals, but you know, that doesn't make you an expert. What really qualifies you to speak as an authority on any given topic? And that's a very reasonable startup question to ask. And the answers that I have for you are these. It so happens that I did have a supernatural experience over 2 decades ago. And of course, I'm going to devote an entire webinar to that experience, explaining what happened, and also how I've come to know what I know and how I got into it and sort of pursued my work with crystals. But it has been 25 years, and you can't do, you know, anything for that period of time without knowing a lot about it. Now, that experience that I had shouldn't actually be a basis for you to take me seriously or listen to me. It's interesting, and it's valuable, and it's informative, but when you get down to it, what really matters is not your credentials. I have no certification from some other expert, because I consider myself an expert or guru on the topic. I've been called that, but I don't make any claims except to say that the facts are the facts. I've worked with them for many years. I've done individual work with people ranging from relaxation to exorcism and to self-realization process, and learning as well, because there are lots of people who want to know more about crystals, and they really do need teachers. So people who know more than them, including all the books that have been written, are informative and useful. It so happens I did a webinar called Crystal Myths, where I actually sort of confront or take a different approach to a lot of what has been written out there and what I call the crystal lore. So not only do I have a lot of experience, but I have an opinion. I have a reference point that is personal. So when you ask yourself, do you want to continue watching this? Do you want to check out some of my other webinars or come to some of my in-person events? The big questions are not, what's my history? You know, I don't say that I'm in some ancient tradition or some elder has taught me X, Y, and Z. I make no such claims like that. I also make no such claims that any of what I'm telling you is scientifically based, and therefore you should believe it because it's science. As we know, even with something as obvious and controversial as climate change, there are different opinions, and ultimately what makes people do what they do, and this stems to religion and politics, etc., is what do you really believe? So if what I'm saying makes sense to you, and if you can resonate with where I'm coming from and what the ideas that I'm giving you, that really is the ultimate qualification of whether I'm worthy to answer these questions for you. So that kind of sets it up. I do have some notes here, and I want to tell you before I go on that another little station identification, the modality that I've created, which is trademarked and unique, is Crystal Concentrics, and I've created a website called crystalconcentrics.com, and you can go there and read my blog. You can learn about my services. You can see what upcoming events I have. I've made a point of really delivering in-person and virtual offerings so that you can go online and experience what it is I have to say, although there's something obviously very special about working either one-on-one over the phone, Skype and whatnot, or actually coming in to do a workshop or meditation with me. So all that oh, one last thing. Power Stone crystals, because I buy and sell crystals, I have a website dedicated to that. It's called powerstonecrystals.com. You can find it easily online. It has some very unique search functions. You can search by shape or color, which are some interesting ways of looking at things. And I'm also working with a collection of stones I call dude rocks, things that I think that would be particularly interesting to people who either want to buy gifts or are drawn to certain energetic qualities, and they can sort of find those localized there. But I do want to get into the questions for you, and I want to begin with a very sort of broad and open-ended question that I got, and this came to me from Nicole. She asks, how do you work with crystals? Now, it was such an open-ended question. I almost dismissed it at first because I'm like, wow, that's a lot to ask. But in point of fact, it's actually a great question, and one that I have addressed in a webinar that is called How to Work with Crystals. So there's a lot to say there. But what I wanted to give you in this experience was a sort of a basic circuit or cycle by which you can work with crystals. And that cycle consists of 3 segments. The first is your sight, your eyesight. The second is your sense of touch. And the third is your imagination. So if you pick up a stone and you look at it, you're going to get a sense of what color it is. You're going to get a sense of what shape it is, whether it's rough or smooth. There's a lot of different qualities that come into play. There's a whole crystal language that I teach that can help you, once you learn that language, identify for yourself what crystals are good for what and how to work with crystals. So once you have that language, or even if you don't have it, there's that sense of sight. There's a sense of touch, which is how does the object feel in your hand? Is it dense? Is it light? Is it sharp? Is it smooth? These are the types of things through touch that can tell you a lot about what you can expect from working with a particular crystal. And then the other thing, aside from the language and the education that you can have, is your imagination. The way that you process information is very, very important in allowing you to run with the raw material that you're given and be able to say, okay, I can work with this crystal in this way. And this will become a little bit more clear as we go through the webinar, because I'm going to answer a bunch of other questions that I think will start to demonstrate what is really involved in making it happen for you, in learning how to work with crystals. So I'm going to ask or present you with another easy question, that is to say easy for me to answer, and that came to me from a woman named Jean, and her question was, what's a good grounding crystal? Now, she had heard that grounding was good, but what really astonished me when I asked her, what does grounding mean to you, was that she didn't really know what grounding was. So I took it as a great opportunity to answer the question, what is grounding? Because a lot of people are unfamiliar with what it is, not just because they haven't been exposed to the concept, but because they haven't been exposed to the experience of being grounded. And when you work with crystals, that's actually a super primary element of the experience. What being grounded is. Okay, when I do meditations, I often start just in yourself, in your own biology, in the steadiness and the unsteadiness of your own anatomical system. I've been completely amazed by both how fragile we are as beings. People can die, people can get very sick, just like that. People who are completely healthy, who have healthy lifestyles. And of course, people who have unhealthy lifestyles can be doing great until they're 98. So there's a lot of mystery as to what keeps us constant and enables our soul to travel from birth to death with whatever encumbrances or unencumbrances that we might come across. So we're still a water system. We're very hydrated, like 78% water, something crazy like that. So we're very energetically mobile. And stones, who have been there for millions and millions of years, are very energetically stable. This was a great question that I got asked. That there was the idea that crystals are still growing, and of course, in the ground where the chemicals and the circumstances are right, then of course crystals do and are growing, and it might take millions of years, or there might be some sort of miraculous event that makes them grow very quickly. But in terms of the crystals that have come out to be in our hands, those crystals are pretty static. What you see is what you get. They're not growing. Although I've heard people say otherwise. There's a belief and an experience that crystals either become lighter, or they change color, or they become cloudy. I don't have a lot of experience with that, maybe because of the way that I am with my crystals, but I do know many people for whom that has been an experience, that crystals sort of seem to evolve over time. But I want to get back to the question of grounding. And once you understand that grounding is taking a stone into your hand, which means marrying the unconstant with the constant, you create a kind of a lightning rod into the earth. You go from the unstable, airy, watery into the earthy, and even the metallic has a factor there too. So there are three stones that I wanted to tell you about that are particularly good for grounding, so I can do a little bit of show and tell, which is always a fun part of this exercise. Now, one of the stones that people know most commonly is hematite, and this is a very special hematite. It's pretty entirely metallic. It's called botryoidal hematite, where it sort of bubbles like this and gets these sort of circular patterns on it. And this is a piece that has become a personal piece of mine. It's got a lot of weight to it. It fits right into your hand, and it's something that people sort of, it's like a go-to stone for grounding. But the fact is that it is also metallic, and I personally, working with stones, prefer something that's not quite an opposite, but is probably my favorite stone grounding material. It's called ruby. Okay, it's a six-sided. This is a particularly exceptional piece. It's six-sided, fits right in your hand. It's a natural crystal, large crystal of ruby. And if I could get 100 of these, I would. But on a rare chance, I happen to come across a pair, and I have two, which is cool. So for me, the ultimate sort of grounding stone experience comes from ruby. But hematite, which is much less expensive, is also a great option. And another favorite of mine is tiger iron. I'm going to show you this large piece here. It's got hematite in it, and it's got jasper, which is a stone aspect, and it also has tigerite. And so together, all of these work to create a sort of melded, blended experience of stone and metal, which gives you that kind of weight, which, unlike a lot of other stones, helps to ground you and make you feel rooted in yourself and in the earth. So that sort of, I hope, answers the question about grounding. Now, I'm going to give you a bit of a more complicated question because I want to convey to you that there's sort of entry-level knowledge about crystals, but there's also more advanced or esoteric knowledge about crystals. And this question comes to me from one of my students, Luke, and he says, I'm quoting what he wrote here, "Crystal grids. I have seen grids made on 5 or 6 pointed stars, and they have to have these specific stones cut in this shape, pointing in such and such directions. And if you do not follow this formula, the grid is broken and will not work." Bam! My sense, my intuition tells me that a grid can be in any configuration that works for a particular person at that point in time. And next month, that same person may need a totally different arrangement involving other stones, or maybe some of the same. So what he was asking, what's happened is he got a teaching from either a person or a book that said crystal grids, which, if you don't know, crystal grids are often pre-designed layouts on a piece of paper, and they might be for prosperity or for this or for that. And you're supposed to lay certain stones in certain ways on that grid. Now, I'm kind of impressed and pleased because he's really thinking in the way that I think about this type of stuff, which is that you need to start relying more on your own intuition and developing your own basis for understanding in order to really get this stuff. Otherwise, you're always going to be running to the books to get information or calling your friend, which is cool if you want to be in community in that way. But I think in order to really internalize, learn the language, and use the language, you need to sort of break out of the box a little bit. So my response to him was, absolutely, you're right. I think it's unrealistic and unreasonable for a person to be limited to one specific grid system for one specific outcome that they're striving for. And that's not even going into what your goals are, whether prosperity is something that you can generate with crystals or love. That's another thing that I touch on in my Crystal Myths webinar. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how much more sort of developed the questions can get. I want to bring it back and reel it in a little bit and go with another question. This is something that happens to me often. I'm at an expo, somebody comes up to me, they say, do you have this stone? And I, sometimes if I don't think they're serious, I'll just say no. Because guess what? If they knew anything about the stone, particularly what it looks like, a casual scan or an intelligent scan of my table would tell them pretty immediately whether I had that stone. And if a person doesn't take the time to even scan what I have, obviously, it's going to be that much harder for me to go to the effort of digging out something more obscure for them, because I'm feeling like, wow, has this person reached a level where it's even appropriate for them to be asking for this more esoteric stone? I mean, it's something like alexandrite, which is super rare, quite expensive, or tanzanite, also quite rare, expensive, and if you get it, it's usually super small. And even though I do believe that small stones can convey big energies, I think that practically the way in which they do so is if they're placed on the forehead. So not every small tumbled stone, if you put it on your forehead, is going to give you that much more of a kick. But there are certain classes of stones that are particularly good for that use. So if someone were to ask me the question, what's good for that, I would recommend that they either attend or check out my webinar about third eye stones. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but what I do want to do is say that people who limit themselves only this stone and no other stone are, I think, closing themselves off to a lot of amazing variety that's out there. And I want to demonstrate with some stones that it's possible to have a continuum of stones that are either qualitatively more or less on one plane, or they're qualitatively different but similar enough that you can use them both for the same purpose. Take, for example, sugilite here, and I'm going to show you that nice and close. Sugilite is a phenomenal stone. It's very similar to lapis, and it has to do with physical manifestation of spiritual intention. But sugilite has mostly been mined already, and a lot of the best stuff is what they call old collection material that's like 20 years old or more. Um, and I'm always on the search for great sugilite, but a friend of mine sent me something pretty similar. I'll show you this part of it. It's called Stitch-Tite, okay? Stitch-Tite is almost like a talc. I'm going to see if I can get it any closer to you. It's got a lot of black matrix stone in it too, but you can tell that the purple is not completely dissimilar from the sugilite. So in point of fact, if you could find a piece of Stitch-Tite, which could be just a few dollars, you could save yourself a lot of money over getting a piece of sugilite. You won't get exactly the same energy, but conceptually they're similar enough that, that it could still hold that corner in your collection. I want to talk about another set of stones in continuum that are very valuable and powerful, and that would be rhodochrosite, which is a real favorite of mine. I'm going to show you nice and close. It's quite red, it's quite rich. What you often find as far as what's available in the market is lighter, less pure material like this. That's either matrix or a light pink. Okay, so rhodochrosite is a stone that is very much having to do with cellular vitality, the energy of your inner workings. And some people simplify it and say, oh, well, fertility. And I could go down that route and explain to you, but if you look at it, you can see it's some pretty vital material. There's another stone called rhodonite, which I don't actually have to show you right now, but I thought it would be interesting to tell you about 3 pieces of rhodonite that I got. One is sort of a dark black and red. The other is a light pink, and the other is a darker pink. And the reason I call them the 3 sisters is because they manifest 3 slightly different aspects of energy that rhodonite has to offer. Now, rhodonite, again, is a great deal cheaper than rhodochrosite, but energetically is similar enough. And I have found another sort of incarnation of stone that is really close to rhodochrosite, but it is kind of on the more expensive side. This is a very special piece of it. It is called cobaltoin calcite. So it's calcite with cobalt in it that turns it this pink color. Sometimes you get spiky crystals, sometimes you get sort of rounded bulbous crystals, as in this case. And this material has a lot of similar energetic qualities to the rhodochrosite. On the topic of sort of cellular biological vitality, if you were to ask me what's good for that, I would of course also need to bring into play carnelian, because carnelian is a super powerful body stone having to do with the first and second chakras, sort of below the solar plexus, and I'll show you that a little bit closer too. Incredibly rich color. It almost looks like a living liver or body organ, which is kind of interesting. Carnelian is phenomenal stuff. And the reason I'm talking about it is to sort of introduce you to that whole concept of continuums of stones, that if you want rhodochrosite, yes, of course, nothing does rhodochrosite like rhodochrosite. But if what you're looking for is some sort of cellular vitality and rejuvenation energetically, you can find that with rhodonite, and you can also find it with carnelian. So I really advocate for people to be creative and to, again, learn the language so that you can apply what you know. And this webinar is not exactly about the language, so I won't get much more into the specifics of that. That is to say, why is this stone this way? Because that could take an entire webinar in and of itself. What I want to do is move on to a different question that I got, which sort of unpacks and opens up a few different really interesting topics. A woman came up to me and she said, you know, isn't rose quartz dyed? I heard that rose quartz is dyed and it makes me really skittish about buying it. Now, it so happens that there are a number of stones that are treated. An example, a good example, the stone that is often treated is agate. This is an agate, and I'm going to show it to you. You see all the lines that are, you know, sort of layers that it has. And often agate can be found inside of the core of an amethyst cluster. But this particular agate has a very interesting added value of having an interior that is sort of flat and white. It's like coated with something natural. And this piece is also natural, but not all agate is black and gray like this. What they do, because it's a little bit porous, is they dye it. So a lot of these slices of agate that you find that are amazing greens and pinks and even reds to make them look like carnelian are in fact dyed agates. So there are a lot of treated stones out there, and there's one other one that I want to talk to you about, which is become a little bit of a favorite, because in principle I'm not a fan of treated stones. Often it destroys their original energy. But what happens sometimes is that it replaces that original energy with something totally new and different and potentially awesome. And there's a specific type of stone that's quite popular called aqua aura. And so people have asked me about it, I mean, every time they see it, especially if they've never seen it before, but often if they have and they're familiar with it, they say, what's that stone? And I have an example of it right here. It is, if you look at it, it's a kind of an iridescent blue. And this is a particularly interesting crystal. This is called an ice crystal. It's a formation that starts narrow at the bottom and then expands and doesn't seem to have full and perfect termination at the top. Now, what makes it an aqua aura is that they take gold dust and they fuse it to the crystal in a vacuum chamber at a very high temperature. So the crystal that was there is gone and it becomes a new crystal with a very large aura. So it's a very appropriately named stone. And I've been looking to get, you know, my aqua aura, the one that I want to keep for myself, that I'm not comfortable passing along or selling to somebody else. So the aqua aura is a treated stone that it can be destabilizing because it's lost its original natural energy. And it now has taken on this new supersized self, and it sort of exists for and in that larger auric space around you, but around itself also. And so it becomes a kind of an esoteric, it becomes particularly an important tap into your imagination piece, because it's an artificially created stone and experience. And our imagination is artificial when you think about it. It's sort of created, it's intangible, it's not something you can point to. It's something that you have, it's something that you know is there, you experience it, but you can't pick up a piece of imagination. although maybe I'm speaking too soon, because I do believe that there are certain stones that speak directly to that part of ourselves. Labradorite specifically is an imagination stone par excellence, and there's a metallic version of that called chalcopyrite, which also speaks to that, but not as well as the labradorite. True iridescence, like even what you would experience in an opal, is more powerful than sort of simply surface iridescence. But I want to return to the question that the lady had posed to me about rose quartz, and I wanted to show you a rose quartz. Here's a chunk of it. And the thing is that rose quartz, really great rose quartz, is getting a little bit hard to find. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest surprises to me in interfacing with people about crystals and finding out what's interesting to them and hearing what their interests are, that is to say, what kind of crystals do they want to buy? I almost never hear anyone talk about rose quartz. And I've told myself that the reason for this is that maybe everybody has a piece already, and they think, oh, well, I've been there, I've done that. I have a piece of rose quartz, so why would I need to get another one? And I think that is that question, why would I need to get another one, is one that I want to answer for you today. For example, the Aqua Aura that I was talking about, I've seen a lot of it, I've sold a lot of it, but I haven't held on to any of it because it was never quite the right piece. And that one I showed you just a minute ago really was the right piece for me to hold on to. So any type of stone that you have, you need to realize that it's not just static. It's not like touching first base, touch second base, okay, I did that, now I can go to third base. In reality, you may think you have the best rose quartz, but there might be another rose quartz out there that's even better or more powerful or more appropriate for you. So I think it really makes sense and behooves people to be on a search, to have an agenda, to always sort of upgrade what they have for crystals and seek more and better. And to that end, I wanted to show you some examples. Take, for example, amethyst. I've got a large cluster back here, and a cluster of amethyst is great to have. It has a sort of spiritual cleansing aspect to it that's incomparable with anything else that's out there. But why not think about a crystal point, even though this is a few points, which makes it a bit of a cluster. This is a magnificent contribution to any collection. To have an amethyst point introduces you to a more focused experience of spirit and spiritual mission and intention. I'm just going to grab a little bit of water here. And even in the world of amethyst, I mean, some stones are particularly rich in terms of their variety. Amethyst is definitely one of those stones. So if you're asking for an amethyst, you should be aware that you really have a lot of choices out there. This is something called amethystine quartz, which is very, very light and has a very, very different energy than most amethyst. This happens to be an celestial as well. I'm trying to get the light there, the light to shine on it in a certain way that shows you all the broken up surfacing. That makes it an celestial. So celestial quartz has particular value as well. And you can feel free to email me again. It's crystalconcentrics@gmail.com. I promised everybody that if I didn't answer your question on the webinar, I'd be happy to answer it online with an email, or in a follow-up webinar, my next crystal Q&A, because I can already feel that's going to be necessary. Before I move on, I do want to show you auralite, which is another variety of amethyst, which has a lot in common with smoky quartz. And when you talk about treated stones, one of the treatments that people ask me about is irradiation. They say, is an irradiated quartz, oh, I don't want that because it's been irradiated. But in point of fact, there are two things that you should know about irradiated quartz. One is that it's a very powerful, energetic, sort of defensive, aggressive, protective crystal. I don't have one that's been artificially created here to show you, but I do have a natural irradiated quartz. And what many people don't realize is that smoky quartz, which this is, it's got some other material on it as well, but smoky quartz gets smoky because it has been irradiated naturally in the ground. So, so in a sense, it's a naturally treated stone that is on the continuum with the irradiated, but the irradiated, the artificially irradiated material is kind of an extreme on the continuum. Whereas this is what is called a Morion, the black smoky quartz, is more certainly in the natural realm, but to say it hasn't been treated, well, of course, all crystals are made of chemicals and are the result of a chemical reaction. They just happen to have happened naturally in the ground. But what I wanted to do was also address a question that I got from somebody about obsidian and what obsidian represented. And I have a human crystal energy zones chart whereby I have overlaid 4 primary energy zones on top of the existing chakra system. The bottom one being the solar plexus down, and then the next one being the heart, and then the voice, and then the mind up into the astral planes. And unlike anybody else that I have seen, I have placed the color black into multiple parts of the human energy system. And obsidian specifically, and I gotta be careful here because we see this natural piece of magnificent jet black obsidian is volcanic glass. And so as such, it's incredibly sharp. And I did actually cut myself earlier when I was handling it. But as far as obsidians go, as interesting as some of the other ones are, sheen obsidian, rainbow obsidian, snowflake obsidian, the pure black obsidian is ultimately, I think, the most energetically, continuously powerful of all of them. Another black stone that I wanted to tell you about was, of course, my friend jet. All right, so this is a piece of jet, and I always blow people's mind when I put it in their hand because they're like, oh my gosh, it's so light. And in fact, it is a carbonate. It does come from plant material, and it's a petrification of wood, but it forms in a different way. Most petrified wood is formed by the replacement of the original tissue, plant tissue, with quartz mineral material that ends up causing the piece to have the same weight of a quartz. Not so with jet. Jet is a very open and clearing stone, strongly, strongly recommended. But I wanted to actually, I'll use that as a lead-in to answer one other question that I got from Lena. One of the first questions that I got when I put word out there that I was looking to answer questions, and that was regarding whether polished stones or tumbled stones are necessarily inferior to natural stones. And since I picked up that jet sphere, it got me thinking about the whole question of polishing. This is a polished rose quartz ball. I'll show that to you nice and close. And I'm also going to share with you that original rough piece of rose quartz. Now, rose quartz, aside from being the stone of unconditional love, which taps into the whole heart chakra area, is a stone that is kind of like one of the essential ones, one of the basic stones that everyone really should have. If you can't afford a rhodochrosite, definitely get a rose quartz, because it's kind of in a continuum with the rhodochrosite. You don't really need the most rare and the most expensive stones in order to appreciate, experience, and enjoy working with crystals. There are lots of great ones that can be quite cheap, but I do believe that you need to get right above a certain quality level to really appreciate and enjoy what the crystal has to offer. Now, rough rose quartz is great as what I call a placeholder. So if you are doing grid, and my word, incidentally, I don't use the word grid. My word is layout or constellation. So I create layouts and I create constellations. A layout is a bit more simple in what it is that it's trying to do, and a constellation is a more universal, grander arrangement that is meant to tap more deeply into universal energies. And I believe that with certain stones, rose quartz is one of them, that if you polish it, you're able to actually get a window into the internal, raw, central, basic, essential energy of the rose quartz. So if you're going to use the rose quartz beyond having it as a placeholder, and you want to actually experience more of the that love that it has to offer, I strongly believe that polished pieces can give you that. And there are other stones that don't that aren't better polished. For example, the sugilite, I think, is a great deal better and more useful to you in raw form than it is in polished form. And I'll get into in my next question Q&A webinar the question of jewelry. Does jewelry work as well as rough pieces? But that's a very valid question to ask as well. What I want to do at the end of this webinar is answer a very sort of profound and kind of touching question that I got. And that one came from Erica. And she asked me, I would like to know what crystals you recommend for war veterans suffering from PTSD and brain injuries. Okay, and that sort of put a real kind of serious and grave spin on the question of how can we use crystals. And I believe that in a situation where someone has been through an experience like that, and it doesn't have to be a military experience, because many of us have had traumatic experiences that have left us with our own PTSD. And one of the things I do want to just mention about that, because I was listening to a story where they were interviewing veterans, and somebody was taking issue with the letter D, with calling it a disorder, when in point of fact, the way that people respond to the type of trauma that they've been through is often a quite natural and appropriate response. So of course they're going to be traumatized by what they've seen. Of course it's going to affect how they think and how they act. If it didn't affect how they think and how they act, then they really wouldn't be as sensitive as we are capable as human beings of being. So to answer the question specifically, what kinds of stones would be helpful to a person who has experienced that level of trauma, and I can't speak to the whole brain injury piece right now, but my gut tells me that the way to help anybody who has experienced an affront, ultimately not only to their cognition in terms of what they've seen and what has actually happened, but their heart has been hurt. Their heart has, in a sense, been broken by the experience that they've been through. So for me, the gateway into working with a person who has had that type of a dreadful experience is through the heart stones. And I have a webinar called The Crystal Heart and a workshop about it, where I really explore more in depth and also individually with people when I am working one-on-one with people. But I want to bring out for you some of those stones. One of them is a very important one, and that's jade. I particularly prefer the dark nephrite jade and the river-worn material because it's very, very natural. It hasn't been cut. It may have been broken off. Sometimes, like this one, you can see this is the river-worn piece, and then this is the broken off piece. But when you touch either one, there's a kind of a softness, particularly on the naturally worn material, that is very similar to the softness of human skin. And I believe that jade is a natural soother, and that people who are dealing with trauma or who have had trauma need some emotional soothing. So jade is a really important part of that. And I had shown you the Morion quartz, the very dark, smoky quartz earlier. But there's a kind of quartz that I think is more useful. And this is me again introducing some of the darker stones into different parts of the chakra system. But the smoky quartz of this quality and color, I place squarely inside of the heart chakra. So what it does, you learned earlier that irradiation, natural irradiation, turns a clear quartz into a smoky quartz. And when smoky quartz is of this particular variety, it is particularly good at transmuting negativity. And that's a question I often get. What's a good protection stone? What I need something in my workplace, or I need something to sort of help me with my client's negativity. And I recommend this type of light smoky quartz as being really ideal. It's not that it takes the negativity and puts it somewhere else. I used to kind of think about it and talk about it in that way. What it does instead is it transmutes it, it neutralizes it, it equalizes it, so it is no longer toxic. In the same way that the actual radiation, which is quite harmful to people, is something that that has been neutralized here to where you can have this type of smoky quartz near you and not experience the harmful effects of a truly radioactive stone. So I would recommend for a person who is suffering from trauma to spend some time with this type of smoky quartz. And what's cool about it is, like the rose quartz sphere, they're omnidirectional. So what it is that they have to give, and that is to say what they radiate into the world, goes in all directions, not just north, south, east, and west, but also up and down and everything in between, 360 degrees. And that works both ways. It works in the sense of radiating that energy outwards, but also being of impact to everything around it. So if I'm here, I can be impacted by this. And if I tap into it from any angle, I can receive the same energy, not just like if it was a crystal with a particularly big facet or face to it.
a lot of the energy would come and go through that face. But in a polished crystal ball, which is why people have originally used crystal balls for scrying and fortune telling, the crystal ball has that omnidirectionality, which is tremendously powerful and useful. So that would be one of the stones that I would recommend for a person who's dealing with trauma. And of course, it is another stone that comes out of the heart chakra. And the last stone that I want to end the webinar with as being relevant and pertinent as a way to treat any person that does, all of us have experienced some sort of trauma. All of us are living in a very stressful world with lots of stressful situations which require compromises and actions that we might regret afterwards, but that we feel are necessary to take. And that sort of, in an extreme, is what a soldier goes through, because the soldier is there to defend their country or their cause, and they're willing to go to any length in order to do that. So I wanted to introduce you to the Milky Quartz, which is a little hard to see in the light. I'll see if I can you see how watery that is and how milky it is. The Milky Quartz pertains to the aspect of the heart chakra having to do with compassion. Okay, and compassion is extremely important for the soldier, again, to have not only towards themselves, but towards others, people around them, towards the actors that they have seen do things that no human being should ever have to see. So compassion is a very important part of treating any type of trauma, but also for us in an everyday capacity. To show compassion towards others and to feel that compassion towards ourselves is very important. And the reason I chose this particular power piece is that it is many different crystallizations, all unified and bound up together, terminated at the top, terminated at the bottom, also a floater. It's not connected anywhere to matrix. And so this is a particularly powerful, not only compassionate stone, but a healing stone. And not every stone is a healing stone, and I could get into it when I talk more about the language of crystals. But what I want to leave you with, I'm going to just sort of hold that right here and also tell you about this piece that's been hanging from my neck the whole time. This is a meteor that blew up over Argentina about 5,000 years ago. And it is iron, and it's my favorite sort of meteoric material. So I wear that for myself as a kind of a spiritual grounding substance. But what I want to leave you with is that if you feel that anything I've said is unclear to you and you're seeking more understanding about it, I want you to feel free to email me, crystalconcentrics@gmail.com. And I want you to feel free to check out my sites, crystalconcentrics.com and Powerstone Crystals, because I do stock and acquire all of these stones that I'm talking about. But most importantly, the asset that you need to have is the learning. It's what goes into your head, what rests inside of your consciousness that you're able to use with the stones that you have, and the understanding that you develop around what is wellness, what is healing, what is the process by which I can work with crystals or even without crystals to affect the types of goals that I have spiritually in myself and in the world. So I hope this has been informative and educational for you. I welcome more and future questions. I was able to answer actually a lot of questions, cover a huge amount of ground in this webinar, but I know that in future ones and in my other ones, I cover a lot of ground too. So don't hesitate to reach out. It's been a pleasure bringing this presentation to you. I am Kyle Russell with Crystal Concentrics and Power Stone Crystals. Thank you.